I made a video like this about Rex, and some people wanted the Xenoblade 1 contrast, so here we are, wrapping the year up with the one about Shulk. This is the third video I've made in 2 days, and I'm getting fairly close to the end of my rope, but I'm carrying on and am motivated purely by spite at the people claiming that my channel is dead after not uploading for only 2 weeks, saying I'm just making excuses when I say that I have more important real-life commitments, and making accounts specifically to harass me for not having finished the videos I said I'd release in December yet. Thank you for your rude comments, they only make me stronger. While this is a comparison video to the Rex one I made earlier in the year, this is not a sequel to it, so you only have to worry about spoilers for Xenoblade 1 in this video. I will be spoiling the Rex video itself in terms of the total number of things that I reached at the end of it, however, as I will be comparing Shulk's totals to Rex's after I finish going through the Xenoblade 1 story. As I said before, I feel like plot-wise Rex should lose more than Shulk as part of his arc anyway, but I'm not sure if 2 actually has more losses, since you learn 3 Monado arts during fights Shulk would have lost if he wasn't just kind of handed them, which by my criteria still counts as a loss. Speaking of those criteria, what are they? This part in my script is very much copy-pasted from the last video, so if you saw that, you might just be able to skip through a couple minutes. Though Shulk is still a main character in Future Connected, I will not be counting it as part of this video, since Melia is the party leader, and it'd add 10 to 15 hours worth of game content that Rex doesn't have to worry about, which is sort of unfair to Shulk in the comparison. I'm going to be a little more nuanced than I probably need to be here, and include 3 categories instead of just a black and white win and lose. I will also add a succeed category, for when the party accomplishes their goal without outright defeating any antagonists. Wins will include outright defeating the opponent in a fight, forcing them to retreat, or a talk no jutsu, where Shulk or one of his allies successfully convinces the opponent to stop fighting for whatever reason. Next, and this is probably the most contentious part, I will be considering moments where the party gets bailed out and Deus Ex Machinas that save them from a certain loss situation as losses, but only under certain conditions. If a new power or ally is hinted at to the party, it can only be a couple members, or known about by the enemy ahead of time, it still counts as a win, since the party could plan around it, or the enemy would have time to consider the possibility of dealing with it. However, if neither knew about it ahead of time, it will still count as a loss even if the actual outcome of the fight was a win or a success. This might seem harsh, but it's going to end up showing that Shulk gets saved by Deus Ex Machina an infuriatingly large amount of times, especially in the first half of the game, and that he ends up winning almost every single fight he takes part in, though a good chunk of those are literally him being handed a win on a silver platter. Lastly, for the sake of brevity, I am actually going to skip over a lot of fairly cut and dry win scenarios. The point of the video is to figure out how many losses there are, not an actual win rate, so forgive me for not going in-depth on the random Mechon roadblock in a central factory, or the Ardun you save Juju from. Any wins in a required fight set up with a cutscene will be added to the tally with a note when relevant. Xenoblade 1 has way more story quests than 2 does, and I will also be counting fights listed in the requirements for those quests, even if they're not set up in a proper voiced cutscene that's in the event theater. This is just the fights mentioned in the quest requirements themselves, not enemies you'll probably have to beat to complete the quest objectives, so Conflagrant Raxiel won't count. You might have noticed one specific thing that I haven't mentioned yet, the win in the fight, lose in the cutscene complaint that a lot of people have. This is largely something people only have a problem with in 2, so it's not really a thing to consider in this video, but it's also not what the whole tally thing is about. I'm only going over what the characters win and lose, and not how it feels to actually play. With all that preamble out of the way, let's finally get going. I won't be counting Dunban in the prologue, so we can actually skip to the first Metal Face confrontation, as the first couple hours of the game are 5 pretty cut and dry wins against the Crabble, Ancient Machines, and 3 packs of Fodder Mechon. Yeah! The second pack might be contentious, but you do beat a few in gameplay and only get saved by Dunban after those are defeated in a cutscene, setting up that there just are more Mechon around. For Metal Face himself, I'm actually going to be nice and not consider this a loss. They obviously don't defeat him, and Fiora does quote-unquote die, but they do keep him occupied for long enough for the Mechon to retreat without completely destroying the colony. Fiora says, "We will save Colony 9 when attacking him with the mobile artillery," and while the losses are severe, they do actually do that because the colony is still standing and the Homs haven't gone extinct, so I'm going to count this as a success, albeit one at a massive cost. Okay! Next is the Arachno Queen, and the first of what I like to call the 4 great assholes of Xenoblade 1. Rein, and by extension Shulk himself, only survive because Shulk spontaneously learns Monado Shield, because if he didn't learn that, Rein would have been killed by the next attack and Shulk obviously wouldn't have survived on his own. The Monado having more powers is foreshadowed earlier, but Shulk literally never trains to unlock any of them, or earns them in any way. 3 out of the 4 he learns in the main story are literally just given to him so he could win a fight, and the 2 optional ones he still just reads about and doesn't discover himself. There's a reason why I really like the replica upgrades he does in Future Connected. It's the first time this weapons developer actually discovers a better way to use his weapon for himself. Needless to say, this counts as a loss. The Colony 6 arc is where things get really stupid. You only beat the Mechon M71 because of the second of the great ass pulls, which is Shulk randomly learning Monado speed the exact same way he learned shield because he saw in a vision that Charlotte would die otherwise. This is a loss. The loss for the M71 is only because it's a Deus Ex Machina, they do actually defeat it, but right after that they are beaten by Zord, so that's 2 losses right in a row. In the mines, Zord is fought twice and beaten both times, and I will be nice and count this as 2 separate fights because there is a significant break and downtime for the party in between them, and this will be 2 separate wins, basically because of what happens next.
Cool!
Outside the mines, the party is ambushed again. Then Dunban and Dixon show up to help, and they start losing again, and it takes an Alvis Telethia Ex Machina in the 3rd great pull to keep them from getting killed. This is clearly only 1 loss, but the entire arc makes the party seem really, really incompetent. And now we reach Machina and the final of the 4 great ass pulls. Thankfully things get a bit more evened out from now on, but for the minor Telethia fight when Shulk is collecting water, instead of spontaneously learning a new art, Alvis straight up comes in and teaches Shulk how to use Purge, because again, there's no way he would have survived without it. The Monado itself shows up and teaches Shulk how to use it better because Shulk isn't good enough at using it to succeed on his quest. Wrap your head around that one. This does not also turn the Leon Telethia fight into a loss because Shulk is already experienced in using Purge, and Melia can also somewhat shut it down, but it is another instance of him getting bailed out of a hopeless situation by no earned power of his own, because there wouldn't be a plot if he died there. Melia has a few solo fights in the Hyantia tomb, but since she's alone for those, only the Orluga Rufus and Tyrea and the Telethia will count as a win there. It really is great getting to see Shulk be the one to unexpectedly bail someone out for once.
Cool!
Shulk gets another power-up to allow him to beat Metalface on Prison Island, but he actually knows that this one has been granted to him, and transforms the Monado to the Monado 2 himself, so this does fully count as a win, since he clearly would have killed Mumkar if Nemesis didn't intervene.
Cool!
Mumkar on Valak Mountain, on the other hand, is actually not going into the total at all, as it's completely inconclusive. We know the party's stronger than him in Sword Valley, and that one does count as a win because they clearly could have killed him and chose to spare him before he took himself out, but the cutscene here shows largely just a 1v1 between him and Dunban, and that gets interrupted by Egil, who doesn't fight anyone before leaving. Before we talk Galahad Egil, you may note that I only counted 1 story quest from the area, and that's because, despite the fact that they all have battle in the name, only 1 mentions defeating Mechon as an objective, so only that one will count. As for that Egil fight, they are clearly overpowered and only beat some fodder Mechon during the altercation, but the goal was to separate Fiora from Egil, and while they do get assistance from her and Maineth in doing so, they went in with the idea that she was still in there somewhere, and had seen Nemesis's capabilities before, so I'm reasonably content in calling this a success and not a loss.
Okay!
You fight Gatto twice, and while the second is obviously a win, the first is interesting, because he's not shown to be having trouble, but uses a big desperation shot and retreats anyway. This shot is blocked by Maineth's power, but again she is an ally at this point, and the party clearly isn't trying to hurt or kill Gatto, so I'll also consider this one a success.
Okay!
Agniratha Egil does have 2 phases.
This is Thancred.
And you don't really beat him on foot and that makes him summon Yaldabaoth, but there's no reasonable justification for counting this as more than the 1 singular loss that it obviously is.
This is going well.
Defeating the Apocrypha generator gives you Monado Cyclone, and this is really good because it's actually representative of how Shulk managed to still carry on with a restricted Monado, so unrestricting it obviously means he's much stronger, and learning the art and having to use it to save everyone isn't part of the fight.
Cool!
This is probably the best Monado art learning in the entire game, and it's the most understated one, which is kind of saying a lot. Mechanis Core Egil is effectively beaten twice, once by getting his mech decapitated, and once by Talk no Jutsu, but this is obviously only 1 win.
Cool!
On the other hand, Dixon shooting Shulk doesn't actually count as a loss, because referring to getting assassinated by a sneak attack as a fight seems to really be stretching the definition of fight. Shulk is basically dead for the next couple hours of gameplay, but the rest of the party is still working and fighting together, so I will count Maineth's duel and the rest of the party's futile attempt to fight Zanza as a loss, but the entire section of escaping Mechanis will go in as a success.
They're still away!
And then there will be 1 win granted for this part, for the defense of Colony 6 once Shulk wakes up.
We are far from finished here.
I pointed out the last loss in the Rex video, and this is actually the final L the party takes for the rest of this game. As far as I and Future Connected are concerned, Melancholy Tyrea is canon, so we'll also count the Mysterious Telethia as a win,
Cool.
and can skip over Insolence Paying, the 4 boss fights Dixon makes you go through before you get to him, and the Giant himself, and skip straight to the final battle. Zanza's fight has 3 phases, and he's only defeated by Shulk unlocking the Monado 3 and becoming a god, but calling this another bailout is a bit more of a stretch. Even before this fight started, and as far back as the Colony 6 defense, Shulk was already generating visions from within himself, showing that he just needed a push to further evolve, and it's clear that out of all the power-ups he's given, this and Cyclone are the ones that he's actually earned. The Monado 2 isn't a bailout, but it is a power-up he's just kind of handed without needing to do any work for it. It's not even 100% clear if Alvis directly chose to make Shulk a god, or if he just decided the world needed a new one and Shulk won the mantle for himself, so I will consider the entire Zanza fight as one final climactic win.
The future doesn't belong to you.
And that's our final total. 34 wins, 4 successes, and 7 losses, as compared to Rex's 31 wins and 5 each for the other 2. The main story of 1 has less cutscenes than 2, despite having 10 levels more worth of gameplay, so it's not surprising that the total number of fights is significantly larger for Shulk, as there are a lot more generic enemy, for the lack of a better term, filler fights throughout the story. It's also important to mention that Xenoblade 1 only has 1 purely inconclusive fight that didn't go in the tally at all, while 2 has several of them, and multiple success fights that are purely just tests. This may be in part due to me counting the Colony 9 defense as a success, but if you compare the things that I called losses, 4 out of Shulk's 7 were literally just bailout losses, and only 1 of Rex's was, in a case where he had already been defeated in a fight before he was bailed out. So, yeah, Rex has more legitimate, actual times where he loses, which again, as I said, makes sense for his character arc, and if we counted instead purely whether or not the characters won or lost in a fight, Shulk clearly has a higher win rate, but a lot of those wins are really hollow because they only occur due to him being handed a new power. I'm not counting Zanza as a loss by means of bailout, but it is still super worth noting that Rex's final boss didn't have any qualifiers on it. It was literally just his party winning a fight against the enemy, whereas I did legitimately have to make an argument for why the Zanza fight should be counted as a win despite Shulk unlocking a new power midway through it. So to conclude, I guess, Shulk has technically an inflated fight count because he has more required story fights that end conclusively than Rex does, and as such, it's reasonable to expect him to have a larger amount of both wins and losses, though Rex does have more successes, and as I said several times before, I think Rex should be defeated in battle more times than Shulk, because his character arc, losing a lot before he learns better things and how to do stuff properly, does make sense. I'm happy with the fact that when you don't count bailouts, Rex does lose more often than Shulk does. However, Shulk winning more, but a lot of those wins being very cheap and extremely unearned, does put a damper on things, because when you put all of those together, it does give Shulk more situations where he should have lost than Rex has, which is, I would say, a failing on both counts. At least by this metric, it's a failing on Xenoblade 2's count for making Rex lose less than Shulk does when they already had Xenoblade 1 to work off of, but it's also a failing on 1's count because, well, a lot of Shulk's wins feel unearned, and after the 4 great pulls, he just kind of ends up going on a winning streak for the rest of the game, and the significance to which Apocrypha impacts his power isn't properly demonstrated at all, because it's never really shown how much his power is being affected, and he's still able to beat Gato, who is a unique face mechon that seems to be on the same tier as Mumkar with it active, and the only person he loses to with it is Egil, who was already clearly shown to be stronger than him before it was activated. On the flip side, for most people, 1 does the whole win and fight, lose in cutscene thing a lot better than 2 does, as a larger portion of the success/loss fights don't end gameplay-wise with the enemy on the ground spewing out experience points and money. I do understand that this was probably a gameplay concession to make sure that you still get rewarded for winning what might still be a difficult boss fight that's supposed to be the finale to a story arc, even if the characters are supposed to lose, but I do think the way 1 handled it was better, and there's probably a way for a future game in the series to have the best of both worlds and still give you a just reward for beating a fight, even if the characters don't win afterwards. Basically, what I'm trying to get at with this is, in terms of battle, combat, writing, and connecting that to the story, both Xenoblade 1 and 2 are imperfect, and that just leaves even more room to improve in a future game, and maybe, if Xenoblade 3 is a combination of 1 and 2, it will take both of the strengths of those two games while leaving the weaknesses behind. And I want the next Xenoblade game to be good, so hopefully they do that. Yeah. And that is it! My spite power is finally starting to run out, so I'm going to be brief. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'm sorry that people who liked the Rex video had to wait this long for the follow-up and all that stuff. And I would also like to thank my patrons again. I bet I gave you a bit of a scare with not really having anything in December after you paid for it, and then just kind of dumping 3 videos on you at the end of December. Happy New Year's if you're in a similar time zone to me and it's not the first already and you're watching this when it comes out. What I usually like to do is, because like, obviously, I'm busy during the holidays, so I don't usually like have a video that comes out near Christmas, but I usually have stuff earlier in December, so I like to reference like, hey, the Xeno series likes to reference Judaism as well as Christianity, so I usually have a video that goes out at some point during Hanukkah and I point that out. Didn't get to do that this year, but since you didn't see a lot out of me this month, I hope you all had happy holidays and are looking forward to the things that I do in the future. Because I have ideas for next year. I'm probably not going to be as consistent as doing weekly scripted videos. I don't think I'm ever going to be consistent in that again, at least until we get a new game, because I'm going to run out of things to talk about, but I have plenty of interesting and fun ideas. I'm going to try to start streaming again for real this time. The Discord server might actually open again for once. And yeah, I hope to see you around. Till next time, this is Luxon, signing off.